What should have been a peaceful afternoon at the park turned into a nightmare. Children's laughter was shattered by police sirens, and a single black father was suddenly branded a kidnapper right in front of his two terrified kids. But what they didn't know, this man was a decorated war hero. From that moment on, an entire city was drawn into a public battle between prejudice, justice, and the truth. The late afternoon sun drifted lazily across the city park, casting long streaks of gold on the cracked blacktop of the basketball court. The place was alive with weekend sounds, children squealing by the swings, the steady whir of bicycle wheels, the faint bark of a restless dog straining at its leash. In the middle of it all stood Marcus Reed, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who still carried himself like the soldier he once had been. His t-shirt was damp with sweat, but his eyes softened each time they settled on the two small figures darting around him. "Come on, Alyssa. Keep your stance low," he called, dropping into a defensive crouch. His 11-year-old daughter clutched the basketball in both hands, her braids swinging as she tried to mimic his form. Her little brother Malik chased in from the side, all elbows and knees, hollering with the kind of reckless joy only an 8-year-old could summon. The ball slipped from Alyssa's hands, bounced once, and Marcus scooped it with practiced ease, pivoting to block Malik's charge. "No fair, Dad," Malik groaned, throwing up his hands. Marcus laughed, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "In basketball, nothing's fair, son. You gotta earn it." He dribbled once, twice, then flicked the ball lightly toward Alyssa. She caught it, wide-eyed, and took a shot that sailed high and hit the backboard with a loud thud. The ball dropped neatly through the hoop. Her scream of triumph echoed across the court. "Did you see that? I made it." "You sure did," Marcus said, clapping his hands together. He let himself grin, not the guarded smile he showed strangers, but the real thing. For a brief moment, with his children's laughter spilling into the air, he almost forgot the heaviness that followed him everywhere. The memories of dusty battlefields, the weight of medals tucked into a drawer he rarely opened, the long, silent nights alone after his wife left years ago. Here, in this little patch of cracked asphalt and bent chain-link fence, he was just Dad. The three of them sprawled on a bench afterward, sipping from water bottles, sweat cooling on their skin. Alyssa fiddled with her phone, giggling as she replayed the shot she'd recorded. Malik leaned against Marcus's side, his small chest rising and falling quickly, sticky with energy he hadn't yet burned out. "You think Mom would have been proud of that shot?" Alyssa asked softly, not looking up from the screen. Marcus felt the question cut through him, sharp and unexpected. He took a long sip of water before answering. "She'd be proud of you no matter what, baby girl. Same as I am." Alyssa nodded, her eyes glistening for just a second before she snapped the phone shut and forced a bright smile. Malik, too young to catch the undercurrent, was already bouncing on his toes. "Let's play again, Dad. Bet I can steal the ball this time." Marcus chuckled and rose, knees aching the way they always did, but he ignored it. He tossed the ball out onto the court and watched his kids chase after it, their laughter carrying across the park like music. For a while he let himself believe this was all that mattered, these fleeting pockets of normal life, safe and simple. But not everyone in the park saw it that way. On a nearby bench, a middle-aged woman in a floral blouse watched with a tight expression, her lips pressed into a narrow line. Beside her, her husband kept glancing up from his phone, following her gaze. Marcus didn't notice them at first. Years of discipline taught him to focus on what was directly in front of him. But as Alyssa dribbled past him, he caught a flicker of disapproval in his periphery. He shrugged it off. He'd felt eyes like that before. At the grocery store when Malik acted out, at school pickups when teachers spoke more to the color of his skin than the contents of his record. He told himself he wouldn't let it poison this moment. "Defense! Defense!" he called, sliding in front of Alyssa, who shrieked with delight as she tried to pivot past him. Malik dove in from the side, and for a second all three of them were tangled together, laughing and panting, a family wrapped in its own little world. That was when Marcus finally noticed the woman raise her phone. She angled it in their direction, pretending to scroll, but her lips moved as she spoke softly into the receiver. The husband leaned closer, his brow furrowed. Marcus's instincts twitched. He'd seen that posture before. overseas and back home. Someone reporting, someone misinterpreting what they thought they saw. He forced his shoulders to stay loose, though his chest tightened. Alyssa caught the shift in his eyes. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Yeah," he lied, patting her shoulder. "Everything's fine. Let's just finish this game strong, all right?" The game went on, but the joy had thinned around the edges. Marcus found himself scanning the park more often, measuring the distance between benches, noting the cars that slowed at the curb. Old habits, soldier habits, creeping back in. He hated that his children had to see even a shadow of that. When Malik tripped and scraped his knee, Marcus knelt quickly, brushing the dirt away. "You're tough," he said gently, kissing the boy's forehead. "Little scratches don't stop warriors." Malik grinned through the sting, nodding proudly. Behind them, the woman's voice carried on the breeze, sharper now. Words like suspicious and doesn't look right floated just enough for Marcus to catch. His jaw tightened. He wanted to walk over, demand she explain herself, but Alyssa's eyes, watchful, searching, pulled him back. Instead, he gathered his kids close, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How about we grab ice cream on the way home? Winner gets extra sprinkles." Malik whooped, forgetting his knee instantly. Alyssa smirked. "Guess that means me, since I actually made a basket." Marcus laughed, but it sounded hollow even to him. The park still buzzed with ordinary life, but under the hum there was a ripple, a vibration that told him peace never lasted long. He reached for the basketball, spinning it absently in his palm. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the court, and somewhere nearby a siren wailed faintly, drawing closer with every second. He glanced once more at the woman with the phone. She turned her head quickly, pretending to fuss with her purse. Marcus felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him, the kind of scrutiny that had nothing to do with a game of basketball and everything to do with who he was. He squared his shoulders, breathing deep, steadying himself. Because he knew, deep down, the quiet was almost over. The laughter of children carried across the park like wind chimes, but on the far side of the basketball court, the mood was entirely different. The woman in the floral blouse sat stiff as a board, her hands folded neatly on her lap before she reached for her phone. Her husband leaned in, muttering something low enough for most not to hear. But Marcus, with ears trained to catch the subtlest cues, caught the sharp syllables. "Doesn't look right." She turned slightly, her gaze narrowing on Marcus and the kids, as though the sight of a black man commanding 2 children with such discipline was a riddle she was determined to solve. Marcus felt it before he truly saw it. That familiar prickle on the back of his neck, the one that told him he was being watched in a way that had nothing to do with admiration or curiosity. He'd lived with that sensation his whole life, long before he wore a uniform, long before medals were pinned to his chest. He had learned to ignore it most days, but some moments were sharper than others, and this one cut straight through his thin layer of peace. "Dad," Alyssa said, tugging on his arm, "can you record me doing another shot? I almost had it perfect last time." He forced a smile and nodded. "Sure thing. Show me what you got." She handed him the phone and jogged back to the three-point line, determination tightening her small face. Marcus steadied the phone, the little red light blinking as he filmed her dribble once, twice, then tossed the ball high. It sailed wide, clanged against the rim, and bounced toward Malik, who lunged for it and tripped over his shoelaces, collapsing into a heap of giggles. Marcus laughed too, lowering the phone, though the sound caught in his throat when he caught sight of the woman now standing, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried in snippets. "Yes, man in the park, yelling orders at the kids, looks suspicious." Marcus's stomach dropped, though his face betrayed nothing. He lowered Alyssa's phone and tucked it carefully back into her hands. "Good effort, baby girl," he said, masking the tightness in his chest. She frowned. "I missed." "You'll get it next time," he promised, brushing a hand over her braids. Then he glanced across the park. The woman turned slightly away, but not before he saw her lips move again, sharper this time. "I don't think they're his." His jaw clenched. He thought of all the times he had been sized up the same way, in grocery aisles, in school parking lots, in quiet neighborhoods, when he jogged at dawn. People saw what they wanted to see. They never saw the late nights he spent helping with science projects, the scraped knees he bandaged, The bedtime stories read in a weary voice. They saw his skin, his build, his discipline, and twisted it into something dangerous. Dad? Mullick's voice pulled him back. Why's that lady staring? Marcus crouched low, cupping his son's chin. Some folks don't understand what they're seeing. That's all. You don't worry about it. But she's calling somebody, Mullick whispered, his eyes wide. Marcus forced calm into his tone. Doesn't matter. We're here together. We're not doing anything wrong. He looked toward Alyssa, whose brows knit as she clutched her phone. She had heard enough to piece things together, too. The woman's husband finally spoke up, his voice louder, annoyed. Just tell them to come check. Better safe than sorry. Marcus straightened slowly, his shoulders heavy with the weight of inevitability. He knew what was coming. Years in uniform had taught him to recognize when a chain of events was already in motion, when the decision had already been made elsewhere, and nothing he said now would stop the wheels from turning. All right, he said with forced cheer, clapping his hands. One more game, then ice cream. Winner gets extra sprinkles. The kids tried to rally, Mullick bouncing on his toes, Alyssa spinning the ball between her hands, but the edge of unease had already crept in. Their movements were stiffer, their laughter more subdued. Marcus played along, guarding lightly, letting them dart past him to shoot, but all the while his eyes flicked to the parking lot entrance, the street beyond, the faint hum of traffic that seemed to hold a note of warning. Minutes passed like hours. The woman finally lowered her phone, a look of grim satisfaction flickering across her face as she tucked it back into her purse. She leaned close to her husband, whispering again. He nodded, folding his arms across his chest, their eyes never leaving Marcus and the children. Alyssa finally sank a shot, the ball bouncing through the net with a hollow swish. She lifted her arms in triumph, but when she turned to look at her father, his smile was strained. She saw it and frowned. What's wrong? She asked. Marcus swallowed, forcing his voice steady. Nothing, sweetheart. You played great. Come here. He pulled both children close for a quick hug, his arms a shield around them. The smell of their sweat, the warmth of their small bodies pressed to his side, reminded him what mattered most. He would hold that feeling tight because he knew, just as sure as he'd known when bullets had whistled past his head overseas, that trouble was on its way. In the distance, faint at first but growing clearer, came the sound he dreaded, the rise and fall of a police siren slicing through the late afternoon air. It was still blocks away, but it was enough to make his heart thud against his ribs. Alyssa's hand tightened around his. Dad, she whispered, her eyes wide. They're coming. He looked down at her, then at Mullick, who clung silently to his leg. He brushed a hand over their heads, steadying his breath. Whatever happens, he said softly, you stay right next to me. Understand? Both children nodded, their faces pale, the game forgotten. Across the park, the couple sat straighter, their posture one of smug certainty. Marcus squared his shoulders, his soldier's discipline settling over him like an old coat. He'd faced down fear before, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield in some foreign land. This was home, and it was about to become a proving ground. The cruiser slid into the park with a low growl, lights strobing against the green of the oaks and the peeling paint of the swing set. The siren cut off mid-wail, leaving a humming quiet that felt louder than noise. Doors thumped open. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and squared off at the shoulders, the other younger, eyes jumpy, hands already hitching at his belt. People stopped mid-sentence. A dog sat down as if it knew to keep out of the way. Alyssa's fingers dug into Marcus's palm. Mullick moved behind his leg and stayed there, quiet as a held breath. Afternoon, the taller one said, voice clipped. His nameplate flashed when he shifted his weight. Denton. The younger officer, Mills, hung back a half step, scanning the park like trouble might crawl out from under the benches. We got a call, Denton went on, about a situation with a man yelling at minors and possibly restraining them. You the one playing coach out here? Marcus kept his posture loose, chin level, hands visible. There was a ritual to moments like this, and he learned it the hard way. We're just practicing, he said evenly. These are my kids. Denton's eyes slid to Alyssa, then to Mullick's small, tight grip on Marcus's shirt. He nodded as if he'd heard, but his mouth didn't change shape. Names? Alyssa Reed, she said, voice small but steady. This is my brother Malik. Mills stepped closer, hands on his vest. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the children and show me some identification. Marcus could feel his pulse in his throat, but his voice stayed calm. I don't mind showing ID, but I'm not stepping away from my children. It's standard procedure, Denton replied, tone flattening into something that aimed to end the conversation. We separate parties to make sure everyone's safe. We are safe, Alyssa blurted. He's our dad. Mills didn't look at her. He looked at Denton. Denton looked at Marcus like he was a locked door. ID, Denton said again, slower this time, as if repetition could turn a request into a law. Marcus nodded once. I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet. Slowly. He let the words hang there, an announcement, a promise, a prayer. He shifted just enough to slip his fingers into the pocket and bring the wallet forward. Malik clung tighter. Denton's hand dropped a half-inch toward his taser before stopping on the radio mic. Mills's jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. All right, Denton said, eyes never leaving Marcus's hands. Let's see it. Marcus held the driver's license between two fingers, letting the officer take it. Denton studied the card, then flicked his gaze to Marcus's face and back again. Mills took a step past Marcus and addressed the children directly. He crouched just enough to look level with them, voice pitching up like he was talking to someone else's pet. Hey there, kids. You know this man? What's his full name? Alyssa stared at him like he just asked if the sky was really blue. Marcus Reed. He's our dad. Mills's smile didn't reach his eyes. And where's your mom today? Alyssa hesitated, just a fraction, and in that small pause, Marcus felt the air tilt. Not here, she said. It's just us. Mills clucked his tongue softly and straightened. Uh-huh. A couple from the bench, the floral blouse, the tight mouth, had drifted closer, hovering at a polite distance that wasn't polite at all. The woman held her phone like a talisman. Officer, she said, chin lifting. We were the ones who called. He was shouting at them. The little one looked terrified. It didn't seem right. The little one scraped his knee, Marcus said, turning just enough to keep everyone in his periphery. I cleaned it off and told him he was tough. That's what you heard. The woman's husband folded his arms. He was barking orders like they were recruits. Marcus felt something old flicker behind his ribs, a thing with edges. He locked his jaw and let the feeling pass like weather. I coach at their school sometimes. Discipline isn't danger. Denton handed the license to Mills and planted himself a step closer, shadows shifting across the badge on his chest. What brings you here today, Mr. Reed? What brings every parent to a park on a Saturday? We're playing. You got paperwork on their custody? Mills asked, too casual. Just routine. Alyssa bristled. We don't carry custody papers to the park. Denton glanced toward the cruiser, then back, calculation moving behind his eyes. Mind if we talk to the kids alone for a minute? Yes, Marcus said. I do mind. You can ask whatever you need to ask right here. Mills's mouth thinned. Sir, cooperation goes a long way. And so does respect, Marcus answered, and heard how tired he sounded, the miles of it, the years. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. A breeze moved through the oaks, the leaves rubbing together like dry hands. Somewhere a toddler started crying and was shushed. Marcus kept breathing slow, even, the way they taught him to do when everything in you wanted to sprint. Coach Reed? A voice called from the jogging trail. Mr. Lopez, the PE teacher from Malik's school, jogged up, sweat darkening the brim of his cap. He took in the scene with a single sweep of the eyes. Everything okay here? Denton turned his attention like a searchlight. You know this man? Yeah, Lopez said, already pulling off his cap, palms open. He volunteers at the rec center. Solid guy. Those are his kids. Everybody in our program knows them. Denton's face didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. A slight lift, as if the extra weight might help him push harder. Appreciate it, he said, which meant he didn't. We'll still complete our check. He nodded a little. Miss, I'm going to ask you to put that device away. Alyssa blinked. I'm not doing anything wrong. Phones escalate situations, Mills said. We'd like everyone calm. We are calm, Marcus said, and you don't have the right to seize her phone. I said put it away, Denton snapped, the first crack in his tone sharp enough to make Malik flinch. Denton saw the flinch and dialed his voice back down, a performance for the onlookers. No one's seizing anything. We're here to make sure these kids are safe. They are. Marcus said, quieter now, not because he was cowed, but because he knew quiet carried farther. He turned just enough to see Alyssa's face. It's all right. Stand by me. Denton shifted his stance, expanding his presence the way men do when they want to dominate the ground under their shoes. Mr. Reed, step aside. Last time I'm asking. No, Marcus answered, the word landing between them like a small stone that somehow made a dent in the earth. He lifted his chin. You can talk to us together. You can note my cooperation. You can look at my license, at their school IDs in my bag, but I'm not stepping away from my children. The couple from the bench traded satisfied glances, as if the scene had hit its first commercial break, and the hero was about to finally be proven the villain they feared. A few more people drifted closer, phones at the ready, faces pinched with curiosity or concern. The air thinned, stretched, snapped tight. Mills cleared his throat. Dispatch confirms your address, Mr. Reed, but we still need to verify custodial status. My daughter is 11, Marcus said, and the edge slipped into his voice before he could blunt it. My son is 8. We came here to shoot hoops. You've had my ID for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That's long enough to run a name. Denton's jaw flexed. You timing us? I count when it matters, Marcus said. Silence again, a different kind this time, the kind that tastes like pennies. Denton leaned in a fraction. You got military on your license. That right? Marcus held his gaze. Yes. Combat veteran? Yes. Denton's eyes flicked toward Malik, still pressed to Marcus's side, then back up again. Ever been treated for anything? Anger issues? Stress? Trouble adjusting? Lopez exhaled through his nose, baffled. Come on. Marcus felt the question settle like grit in his teeth. He thought of late nights staring at the ceiling, of the things you never tell children because they deserve a softer world than the one you carry. He kept his voice level. I'm a father in a park with my kids. Denton nodded slowly, as if Marcus had confirmed something only Denton could see. He handed the license back, but he didn't step away. Mills shifted left, a subtle move that trimmed the space between Alyssa and the sidewalk. The woman in the floral blouse lifted her phone again, her mouth an O of fascination. Alyssa's voice came small but steady. Dad? I'm here, he said, eyes on the officers, body angled to shelter both children without making it look like a barricade. Right here. Denton's radio crackled with static. He clicked it once, twice, a little fidget that sounded like a threat. Let's try this again, he said, the words patient the way a locked door is patient. Step aside. Let us talk to the kids, then you can go on with your afternoon. Marcus looked at the man like he'd looked at a dozen roadblocks in a dozen countries, at gates with guards who insisted that following their script was the only way through. He breathed in, slow and deep, and let his answer come out as steady as a heartbeat. No. The word wasn't loud, but it carried. People shifted closer. Someone whispered, "Start recording." Lopez's hands spread an inch wider, as if he could pull the heat out of the air with his fingers. Mills's shoulders prickled. Denton took one small step, and the space between men and father and children shrank to something that could be measured in inches. Malik's grip on Marcus's shirt tightened, fabric bunched in his fist. Alyssa swallowed and lifted her phone higher, not to provoke, but to witness. Marcus felt the weight of their trust like a metal on his chest, heavy, bright, impossible to ignore. He anchored his feet to the worn blacktop and set his voice low and calm, the way you do when you're teaching people not to panic. We haven't done anything wrong, he said. We belong here. Denton's expression didn't change, but the air did. It bristled, it thickened. Somewhere a swing creaked. Somewhere a pigeon flapped. And in the middle of a city park on a harmless Saturday, surrounded by playground paint and dandelions, the ground shifted under a family like a deck of cards sliding toward a cut no one wanted. The little things, an officer's stance, a girl's phone, a boy's quiet breath, lined up like dominoes, waiting for a finger to tip the first one. The sun had begun its slow descent, stretching long shadows across the court when the words came sharp and final. Sir, we received a report of a possible child abduction, Officer Denton announced, his voice pitched for everyone in earshot. The sentence hit like a gavel. People turned their heads. A jogger slowed mid-stride. The couple who had made the call stood straighter, as though vindicated. The word abduction hung in the air, heavy, ugly, a poison that seeped into the cracks of the afternoon. Marcus felt Alyssa stiffen beside him, her small hand slick with sweat against his palm. Malik pressed his face against his father's leg, his whimper muffled but unmistakable. Marcus forced his breathing steady, the soldier's rhythm he had carried through firefights and midnight patrols. This wasn't a battlefield, he told himself, but the stakes, his children's safety, their innocence, felt higher than any he had ever known. That's a lie, Marcus said, his voice low, deliberate. These are my children. You have my license. You've already run it. Denton's jaw flexed. We'll be the ones to determine that. Reports indicate the man was aggressive, barking orders. It matches what we've seen here. I was coaching them, Marcus said, still calm but with steel sliding under his words. That's all. The woman in the floral blouse stepped closer, her phone clutched like evidence. He had that little boy by the arm. The child looked terrified. Marcus's teeth ground together. He remembered the moment, Malik tripping, scraping his knee, the way he had lifted him up, brushed off the dirt, kissed his forehead. What she saw was not what happened. But the way she said it, the certainty in her tone, twisted it into something foul. Is that what you saw? Marcus asked, his eyes on her, not aggressive, just steady. She faltered for half a breath, but then her husband cut in. We know what we saw. Better safe than sorry. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some frowned at the accusation. Others whispered and lifted their phones higher, capturing every second. The crowd was no longer passive. They were witnesses, but to what depended on the story that survived. Dad? Alyssa whispered, her eyes wide, wet with confusion. Why are they saying that? Marcus crouched slightly, so his face was level with hers. Because some people see what they want to see, not what's real, he told her softly. But you and your brother know the truth. That's what matters right now. Malik tugged at his shirt, whispering into the fabric. Are they going to take you away? No, Marcus said firmly, though the weight pressing down on his shoulders threatened to crush him. I'm not leaving you. He rose again, placing a steadying hand on each child's shoulder, his eyes never leaving the officers. Behind them, more people gathered. Phones pointed like tiny spotlights. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "This doesn't look right." Another voice, higher, nervous, answered, "He's calm, though. Doesn't seem like someone dangerous." Denton shifted his stance, broadening his frame. "Mr. Reed, step aside. We need to speak to the children alone." "No," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. "You can ask what you need in front of me. You don't separate a father from his kids over a false report." Mills, the younger officer, piped up, his tone edged with false reassurance. "We're not saying you've done anything yet, but these situations can get messy. If you cooperate, we can resolve this quickly." Marcus let the words settle, his eyes sweeping the faces around him, the couple brimming with certainty, the officers circling like hawks, the crowd split between doubt and sympathy. He felt the burn of injustice rising, the familiar taste of bile he had swallowed too many times before. But his children were pressed close, trembling, and he knew rage would only feed the fire they were trying to set. "I am cooperating," Marcus said, quieter now, but each syllable deliberate. "You have my ID. You have witnesses who know me." He turned his head slightly, meeting the eyes of Mr. Lopez, who had edged closer. "Tell them." Lopez raised his voice, addressing the officers. "He's Coach Reed. I work with him at the school. Everyone knows him. That's his daughter and son. This is a mistake." For a moment, hope flickered. A few in the crowd nodded. Someone even said, "Yeah, I've seen them at the rec center." But Denton's expression didn't shift. If anything, it hardened. "We'll still need to verify," Denton said, dismissing the testimony with a flick of his tone. "Too many times people claim to know each other, and it turns out otherwise. We're not taking chances." Marcus felt something old and raw tighten in his chest. He'd heard those words in different forms across continents, in checkpoints where his uniform didn't matter, in airports where his skin carried the wrong story, in neighborhoods where his presence was always a question mark. Not taking chances, always on him to prove he belonged. Alyssa's phone, still in her hand, trembled slightly. She raised it higher, angling the lens toward Denton. "I'm recording this," she said, her voice small but steady, "so everyone knows the truth." The declaration sparked a new wave in the crowd. People whispered louder. Some lifted their own phones. Denton's eyes flicked to the lens, irritation flashing like a blade. Mills shifted uneasily, his lips tightening. Marcus placed a steadying hand on Alyssa's shoulder, pride mixing with fear. "Stay close," he whispered. The air had changed. The accusation of abduction, planted so casually, had turned the park into a courtroom without walls. And Marcus, standing tall with his children pressed against him, understood the gravity. He wasn't just a father protecting his kids anymore. He was a black man defending his very right to claim them in the eyes of people who had already written another story. He straightened his back, his soldier's posture settling in. His voice carried clear across the park, firm enough for every bystander, every camera, every skeptical ear. "These are my children. We came here to play, that's all. And no report, no suspicion, no prejudice will make that any less true." For a heartbeat, silence followed, thick and taut. Then a baby cried. Someone coughed. The moment shattered, but the weight of it lingered. The officers shifted again, circling. The crowd pressed closer, and Marcus knew the battle was only just beginning. Mr. Lopez edged closer like a man stepping into a storm he hoped to calm, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Officers," he said, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the rustle of the crowd, "that's Coach Reed. He's helped at our school for years. Those are his kids. I've watched him tie that little guy's shoes on rainy mornings and bring snacks for the team on Saturdays. He's solid." His tone was plain and earnest, the way a good PE teacher talks when he wants everyone to take a breath. For a heartbeat, it felt like the park remembered itself. Fathers and mothers, kids and kites, the ordinary blue of a wide sky. A couple of parents near the swings nodded along. A teen with a skateboard said, "Yeah, I've seen him at the rec," like he was adding a stone to the right side of a scale. Alyssa's shoulders loosened a fraction. She looked up at her dad as if she'd watched a door crack open. Officer Denton didn't move. He let the moment hang, then cut it clean. "Duly noted," he said, voice polished again, official. "We still have to proceed. A personal acquaintance doesn't override a citizen report." He looked back at Marcus like he was reading a card through glass. "Mr. Reed, are you currently under treatment for any combat-related stress disorders? Any history of outbursts? Domestic disturbances?" The words were smooth as a brochure and twice as sharp. They were meant for the cameras, for the couple standing righteously at the edge of things, for the part of a crowd that likes a neat box with a label: dangerous, unstable, other. Marcus blinked once, slowly, as if he had dust in his eye. A dozen answers rose in him. About nights he'd gotten up to stand at a window until the city turned pink. About humming old church tunes under his breath while his hands washed dinner plates so they wouldn't shake. About how he'd learned to steady himself by reciting multiplication tables with Malik when the boys struggled. 10 times 3 is 30. 10 times 4 is 40. Buddy, you got this. But he said none of it. "No," he answered, simple and true. Then he added, because it felt important to set the ground under his feet, "I'm a father with my children at a public park." Mills stared at his shoes for a second, like he wanted to be anywhere else. The woman in the floral blouse shifted, emboldened by the shape the question had given her thoughts. "I knew it," she breathed, to no one and everyone. "I told you there was something off." Her husband squeezed her hand. "We did the right thing," he murmured. The phrase floated over to Marcus like a cold draft. We did the right thing. He wondered what those words would sound like years from now in the memory of his daughter, in the fast breath of his son when a blue light flashed behind their car. He wondered how many times he would have to tell them the truth so it outweighed a stranger's certainty. "Sir," Mills said, trying for conciliatory and landing somewhere thin, "let's ease this up. If you'll just take a couple steps back, we'll talk to the kids. Make sure they're—" "No," Alyssa said, surprising herself. Her voice was small, but it found a register that carried. "We're fine. We don't need to be separated from our dad." She lifted her chin and stared straight at Mills, and for a flicker his face softened, like he was looking at his little cousin at Thanksgiving asking for the last roll. Denton's look snapped him back in place. The tall officer shifted again, filling space, a textbook figure in an expanding posture drill. Lopez glanced at Marcus, worry ticking in the muscle at his jaw. "Coach," he said quietly, "you want me to call Principal Harris? Or your pastor? We can get folks over here who know you." Marcus shook his head once. He didn't want a caravan of people who loved him arriving to discover him cuffed and his children separated. He didn't want to turn an ugly theater into a desperate parade. A stroller creaked by, its wheels crunching grit. Somewhere a little boy complained about leaving the sandbox. The park went on pretending, as parks do, that the ordinary could coexist with the remarkable. But around the basketball court, the air had condensed. Every breath tasted of metal. Alyssa's phone trembled in her hand, a small square of modern mercy and risk. She steadied it with both palms, slipping into the habit of a generation that knows when to make a record. Denton noticed. His voice cooled another degree. "Miss, I'm going to instruct you again to lower the device." "It's not illegal to record in public," Alyssa answered, and in the corner of her eye she searched for her father's nod and found it. "It escalates situations," Denton repeated, clipped, as if reading from a manual that had never seen a Saturday or a child. "What escalates situations is pretending you know more about my family than we do." Lopez snapped before he could swallow it back. He looked like a man who had never much cared for confrontation, surprised by the heat in his own words. Mills held up a palm at him without looking. "Sir, please." A man in a city park's polo shirt ambled closer, radio clipped at his waist. "Everything okay here?" he asked to no one in particular, voice light like a guy who'd had training on how to say everything okay here when it plainly wasn't. Denton gave him a little nod that said, "Official business." The parks worker stalled, then drifted back, shame in his shoulders. Alyssa watched him go with a flash of hurt that Marcus felt like a bruise. "Mr. Reed," Denton said, setting his feet, "I'm asking one final time. Step aside." The words had the flat authority of a recorded announcement on a train you can't get off of. Malik tightened his grip, fingers bunching a fistful of his father's t-shirt. Marcus lowered his head an inch toward his son. "I'm here," he murmured. "You're okay." He thought of Malik at 4, a fever burning through his tiny body, the night he held him in a rocking chair and hummed old hymns until dawn. He thought of Alyssa, 11 now, but once small enough to ride on his shoulders, who had asked him last year if there would ever be a day when she could just be a kid and not a lesson for somebody else. He thought of all the times he had promised them safety in a world that couldn't keep its end of the bargain. "Lieutenant!" the floral blouse called, as if she'd summoned a rank by will alone. But it was only another cruiser easing up by the curb, a third officer stepping out to stand by, the stage filling with more uniforms and heavy belts. The sound of a helicopter far off thumped like a pulse. Marcus heard his own heart answer it. He lifted his gaze to Denton and spoke in a tone you use when you've told someone you're not moving, and now you are simply letting them know the earth will have to adjust. "I'm not stepping away from my children." The words didn't rattle. They sat between them like a low stone wall on an old farm, plain, unmoving, hard to argue with unless you wanted to trample something that had stood a long time. Mills shifted left 2 inches, a small geometry that put his shoulder between Alyssa and open space. "No," Marcus said very quietly now, and the officer froze as if the single syllable had weight. The crowd's murmur thickened. Phones rose like a field of narrow flags catching light. Somewhere a mother said, "Keep rolling," under her breath. "Enough," Denton said, tone snapping like a dry twig. He stepped fast into Marcus's space, hand darting out, not for a weapon, not yet, but flat to Marcus's chest with a shove meant to move a body like a piece on a board. The contact was electric and wrong. Alyssa gasped. Malik cried out, high and startled, the sound of a small boy's world tilting. Lopez's "hey" cracked like a starter pistol. For Marcus, the shove wasn't a push so much as a switch. Somewhere a door inside him swung on its hinges. The smell of sun-warmed asphalt disappeared and was replaced by dust and diesel and the old iron taste of caution. His feet planted without instruction. His hands rose, open, not in surrender but in clarity. He felt the mathematics of distance and balance drop over him like a clear sheet. "Do not touch my father," Alyssa said, the words ragged with fear and something braver than fear. Denton squared again, reaching for Marcus's wrist now, the motion practiced, efficient, the kind of move you do when you expect compliance or chaos and you'd prefer the first but will take the second if it proves your point. Marcus's breath drew in once, deep and clean, a breath that remembered cadence and calm under fire. He saw the path through the next beat the way a chess player sees 3 moves ahead. Somewhere a voice in the crowd said, "Oh my God!" Somewhere the woman in the floral blouse finally lowered her phone, eyes wide. Suddenly audience to a play she hadn't meant to write. And in the space of a heartbeat, between the grab and the hold, between insult and injury, between a father and the hands closing on him, the moment tipped, waiting to fall. The shove against his chest was more than a violation. It was a trigger. Marcus had been touched in anger before, but this one carried the weight of authority, the kind that dared him to flinch so it could be used against him. He had promised himself he would hold back for his children's sake, promised to keep the soldier buried deep under the father. But when Officer Denton's hand slid from push to grab, clamping fingers around his wrist with practiced force, the decision was no longer his. The soldier answered before the father could intervene. It happened so fast that later even Marcus himself would remember it in fragments. His arm rotated outward, twisting in a way the academy had drilled into him 2 decades ago. Denton's grip broke, his hand recoiling as if struck by lightning. Marcus shifted his stance, feet widening, knees bending slightly, the movement of a man who knew how to claim his balance and never surrender it again. His free arm swept behind him, guiding Alyssa and Malik closer, tucking them into the narrow pocket of safety that his body created. "Do not put your hands on me," Marcus said, his voice no longer the soft tone of a father soothing frightened children. It carried steel, command, the echo of parade grounds and briefing tents. Alyssa's breath caught. She had never heard her father speak like that. Malik's fingers clutched his shirt so tight that the fabric pinched his skin. The crowd gasped, a ripple of sound that spread across the court. Phones lifted higher, screens glowing like fireflies in the twilight. Someone whispered, "Oh, hell," while another voice, urgent and low, muttered, "Keep recording." Even the woman in the floral blouse, who had stood smug and satisfied moments before, faltered. Her phone dipped an inch as she watched the man she had painted as a threat transform into something she had not imagined, a man who radiated authority, control, and training far beyond anything she expected. Denton stumbled back, his hand hovering near his belt. The younger officer, Mills, reacted instantly, shifting to Marcus's flank, his posture sharp and aggressive. "Sir, calm down," Mills barked, his voice betraying nerves. "Put your hands where I can see them." "They've been in plain sight this whole time," Marcus answered, his tone measured, his eyes locked on the older officer. "My children and I are not threats, but I will not be manhandled in front of them." "Dad?" Alyssa's voice cracked. She pressed closer to his back, her phone still raised. "They're gonna hurt you." "No, baby girl," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the officers. "I've spent my whole life learning how to stand tall, and I'm not bowing now." Denton's jaw tightened, his pride pricked. He stepped forward again, slower this time, trying to recover authority that had slipped. His hand hovered near his taser, fingers flexing. "You think this is a game?" he sneered. "We can end this right now. Produce more ID or we're taking you in." Marcus straightened, his chest rising with a calm that masked the storm beneath. He could feel the tremor of his children pressed against him, could sense the weight of dozens of eyes fixed on the scene. He knew every choice from here on wasn't just for himself. It was a lesson carved into his children's memories. "We've already given you everything you asked for," he said. "What you want now is a justification for what you've already decided. But I won't let you invent one by dragging my kids through it." The officers edged closer. Mills made a quick move to Marcus's side, but Marcus pivoted subtly, his body tracking every angle. The instincts of years in uniform had returned, a language of space and timing that never left him. He noticed the shift in Mills's weight, the way his right foot angled forward like he was preparing to lunge. He recognized Denton's squared stance, the flicker in his eyes that suggested frustration was about to override training. "Stay back, boys," Marcus said, though his words were meant for his children. "Safe distance. Remember what I taught you." Alyssa's hand trembled, but she nodded even as tears brimmed in her eyes. Malik's lip quivered, but he backed a step, his tiny fist still gripping the hem of his father's shirt until the last second. The air seemed to still, heavy with anticipation. Denton lunged forward, quicker this time, aiming to seize Marcus's arm in a hard clamp. Marcus sidestepped, the motion fluid, and guided Denton's momentum past him, forcing the officer to stumble. He released the arm immediately, not holding, not striking, but redirecting with precise efficiency. Denton staggered, nearly losing his balance, and the crowd gasped again. "What the hell?" Mills charged, his baton halfway out of its loop. "Stand down," Marcus barked, his voice sharp as breaking glass. The command wasn't defiance, it was authority, and it froze Mills mid-motion. For a moment, the younger officer looked like a rookie in front of a seasoned drill sergeant. Phones captured everything, the stumble, the cry of the crowd, the moment of hesitation. In that instant, Marcus was no longer just a father in a park. He was something larger, a symbol that the bystanders couldn't yet name, but felt in their bones. A voice rose from the back of the gathering. "He's trained," someone shouted. Another answered, "He's not fighting, he's defending." The murmurs grew louder, and suddenly the officers weren't just facing Marcus, they were facing a wall of public eyes. Denton straightened, his face flushed red with rage and humiliation. His hand hovered near his gun now, the line between escalation and disaster razor thin. Marcus saw it, every twitch, every possibility. He planted his feet, his body ready, not to attack, but to shield, to absorb. He wasn't going to let anyone near his children. Not again. Not ever. "Don't you dare," Marcus said, his voice a low thunder that carried across the park. "Not in front of them. Not in front of all these witnesses. You will not touch me again." For a moment, the entire park seemed to hold its breath. Even the leaves above stilled in the twilight air. The soldier in Marcus had fully risen now, not in violence, but in resolve. A presence that filled the space until there was no mistaking the truth. He was not a threat. He was a protector. And he was prepared to stand his ground no matter the cost. In that frozen heartbeat, with his children pressed close and strangers' phones capturing every angle, Marcus Reed ceased to be just another black father questioned in a park. He became the immovable wall, the line that could not be crossed, the living reminder that some men carried both the scars of battle and the unshakable duty to shield what was theirs. And as Denton's finger twitched near his weapon, and the crowd cried out in warning, the world tipped toward a breaking point, waiting to see which story would be written next. The world held on to a thin thread of quiet, and Marcus decided he would cut it himself before someone else did it for him. He lifted his hands slowly, palms out, not in surrender, but in clarity, then eased one back toward his pocket just enough for everyone to see the movement. His voice was steady, measured, meant for the officers and the watching phones, and most of all for the two small hearts behind him. "I'm reaching into my wallet," he said. "Nice and slow." "Keep those hands where?" Denton started, but the sentence died when Marcus stopped halfway, pinched leather between two fingers, and drew the wallet out like a man coaxing a bird from a snare. He flipped it open. There was the driver's license already seen and dismissed. Beneath it, a creased photograph protected by a fogged plastic sleeve. He slid the photo free and held it up to the failing light. It was an old newsroom picture, the kind that runs above a fold and ends up taped to refrigerators. Marcus stood in a too-stiff uniform, jaw tighter than his smile, while a colonel pinned a silver star to his chest. The medal wasn't on the paper so much as it was in the room now, catching sun, catching breath. Next to the photograph was a folded letter on Department of the Army letterhead, the ink softened by years, the words still hard as nails, conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. Marcus didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. He only held the letter steady, the way you hold a truth. For a beat no one spoke, and in that beat the park changed shape. Alyssa reached around his elbow to see better, her mouth parting. Malik leaned from behind his father's hip, eyes wide and shining. The couple who had called this down upon them both drew a breath at the same time, as if they'd been rehearsing surprise together. Phones leaned in. A skateboard rolled to a stop somewhere with a lonely clack. Then an older man in a sun-bleached tiger's cap stepped out from the second ring of onlookers. He had the posture of someone who'd learned long ago to take off his hat for certain things. "Well, I'll be," he said, voice rough as gravel and twice as honest. He squinted, took another step closer without asking permission, and tapped the edge of the photo with a careful finger that didn't quite touch. "I remember that picture, The Free Press ran it. You're the one pulled those boys out of the convoy fire on Root Bear, aren't you? Marcus didn't break his stance. He just gave the man a small nod of acknowledgement. Gratitude passed from one stranger to another like a folded flag. We all pulled each other, he answered. No one makes it alone. The man's throat worked. He took his hat all the way off now, pressing the bill to his chest. Name's Henry Carlisle. 101st, 69 to 71, sir, with respect. His voice dipped on the last word, not to flatter, but because some words earn their weight. A murmur rolled through the crowd, different from the hungry buzz of moments before. This one had warmth in it and memory, and the kind of pride that belongs to people who rarely get to feel proud. A mother on the edge of the swings put her free hand over her mouth. A line of teenagers, bold and gawky, fell quiet, their phones forgotten at their sides. For a blink, Marcus saw his children reflected in all those eyes. Saw them not as suspected cargo, but as the son and daughter of a man who had done a hard thing far from home and then come back to do the hardest thing of all, which was to raise them right. Denton's face didn't shift much, but something in the angle of his jaw went from stone to flint. He didn't look at the letter. He looked at the way the crowd had shifted away from him, the way gravity had found a new center. This isn't relevant, he said, turning the words into a wedge. We're not in Afghanistan. We're in a city park with a citizen complaint and an uncooperative subject. Henry Carlisle's head snapped up. You watch your mouth, he said, and the old soldier in him stood up straighter, the years falling away. That's a decorated officer. Was, Denton corrected, slicing with a thin smile. Was an officer, not now. He turned his attention back to Marcus, as if wiping off a windshield. You think a ribbon changes protocol? It doesn't. People lie, photos lie, paperwork lies. Our job is to make sure these kids are safe. They are safe, Alyssa said, and there was no wobble in it this time. She found her father's elbow and anchored herself there, half shield and half sentinel. He saved people. He saves us every day. Mills flicked a look at Denton, wanting direction and getting a sermon instead. Miss, step back. He motioned toward the photo, feigning patience. We respect your father's service, but right now, you respect his service by not making up stories because he told his son to keep his stance low. Alyssa shot back, and a ripple of disbelief and pride went through the cluster of women near the play structure. One of them whispered, That girl is somebody. Lopez moved in until he stood shoulder to shoulder with Henry. Officer, you've got 3 community witnesses confirming identity and relationship. You've got video of the whole afternoon, my phone, her phone, his, and you've got a letter I would frame and hang over my mantle if it had my name on it. This isn't safety anymore. This is about not wanting to admit you got it wrong. Denton's eyes cooled the way a pond does when a cloud crosses the sun. Step back, sir. Last warning. Henry didn't move. I buried friends, he said quietly, so only those closest could hear, and yet somehow it carried anyway. Some of them black, some of them white, all of them boys who deserve better than this. You don't talk to him like he's trash. The word trash seemed to suck the oxygen out of the next breath. The woman in the floral blouse flinched, as if someone had said it to her. She looked at Marcus then, really looked, not at the silhouette she'd built in her mind, but at the man in front of her, and something like doubt crept in at the seams. She lowered her phone without meaning to. Marcus didn't press the advantage. He didn't lift the letter any higher. But he didn't wave the photo like a flag. He simply held them steady, a quiet, stubborn fact. I'm not asking for special treatment, he said, and the way he said it made the very idea feel small. I'm asking you to see what's right in front of you. My kids, my name, my record. We came to this park to practice and eat ice cream. That's the story. Denton looked past Marcus at the crowd, reading the wind, and chose the storm. Here's my story, he said, rolling his shoulders back until the radio on his chest clicked against his vest. A reported disturbance. A male subject who refuses lawful commands. Possible mental health factors. This is not a medal ceremony. This is an investigation. Step away from the children. It would have been easy to answer rage with rage. Marcus felt the old heat rise, quick and hard, but he drew it down like a window shade. He thought of the letter in his hand, not as a shield, but as a promise he'd made long before anyone here had known his name. To protect, to hold, to stand in the gap. He slid the letter back into the wallet, tucked the photo in behind it, and put the leather away without taking his eyes off Denton. "No," he said, the word plain as bread. "Not 1 inch." A hush fell again, a different hush than before, heavier, more certain of itself. The phones came back up in a coordinated wave. The officer's fingers twitched at his taser. A siren spoke somewhere closer now, the sound rounding the corner like the next act in a play. Henry put his hat back on and folded his arms, posting himself like a guard where he stood. Lopez breathed in through his nose and set his feet. Alyssa's hand found Malik's. "Look at me," she whispered to her brother, and when he did, she gave him a smile that shook a little at the corners but held. "We're okay." "We're okay," he echoed, as if the saying of it might make it so. Denton's jaw worked once, twice, and then he pointed at Marcus's chest in a gesture that said everything and meant nothing. "War stories don't change protocol," he repeated, louder now for the benefit of the cameras. "You either comply or we escalate." Marcus let the last of the sun touch his face and then fade. "I already complied," he said, and the tiredness in it made more sense than any shouting could have. "You just don't like the answer." The line between them didn't move. It deepened. And with the letter back in his pocket, but the truth of it hanging in the air like a bell still ringing, Marcus stood his ground while the park, children, veterans, mothers, strangers, chose which story they would carry home. The air had thickened to the point where even the breeze seemed reluctant to move. Denton's finger twitched once more near his belt when a new sound intruded. Another cruiser, tires crunching gravel as it nosed into the lot. Its lights painted the oaks with nervous red and blue. A taller officer climbed out, his hair steel gray at the temples, his movements slower but more deliberate than the younger men who had already drawn the line. His badge read Lieutenant Kramer, though he hardly needed to announce himself. His presence alone shifted the air. The crowd parted slightly, as if giving way to someone who carried more weight. Marcus felt Alyssa's small hand grip tighter around his own. Mullick's breath quickened behind him. The rhythm of their fear was almost louder than the chatter of the bystanders. He lowered his head for a beat, steadying himself before raising his eyes to the newcomer. "What's the situation here?" Kramer asked, his voice low but carrying. Denton answered immediately, almost too quickly. "Reported child abduction, possible mental instability. Subject is noncompliant, refuses separation from minors." Kramer's gaze slid from Denton to Marcus, pausing on the children huddled close. His eyes narrowed a fraction, but whatever passed through them stayed hidden. He stepped closer, boots heavy on the cracked pavement. "Mr. Reed, is it?" "Yes," Marcus replied evenly. "These are my children. You've already seen my license. You've heard from witnesses. We were playing basketball." Kramer let the silence stretch. He turned slightly, sweeping his gaze across the crowd, catching sight of the woman in the floral blouse, who gave a sharp little nod as if urging him to believe her side of things. Then he looked back at Marcus. "Do you have additional documentation? Custody papers? School records?" Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but he caught himself. "No, Lieutenant. I don't carry a file cabinet to the park. I carry a ball." He gestured faintly at the orange basketball lying forgotten by the bench. The corner of Kramer's mouth twitched. Whether in amusement or disdain, Marcus couldn't tell. "These situations," Kramer said, tone softening as if speaking to the crowd as much as to Marcus, "can be dangerous. Men come back from combat with issues. It's not their fault, but we have to consider the safety of the children first." Marcus's teeth ground together at the word issues. He'd heard it before in job interviews and casual conversations where people thought they were being kind. Issues. It turned years of discipline, of clawing back a normal life, into something fragile and suspect. He breathed slowly through his nose, his soldier's discipline keeping the fury caged. "You want to talk about safety?" Marcus said finally, his voice carrying just enough to reach the crowd. "My kids are safe with me. They were laughing, playing, until strangers decided to write another story on top of ours, until you all showed up to enforce it." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some nodded, some frowned, but all of them felt the weight of the words. Kramer tilted his head, considering, then spoke again in that practiced tone of authority. "Mr. Reed, you're making this more difficult than it has to be. Step aside. Let us talk to the children. Prove what you're saying. No, Marcus said, his voice flat, immovable. The refusal rang louder than any shout. Alyssa squeezed his hand and lifted her phone higher, trembling but determined. Malik pressed his face into his father's side, whispering, "Don't let go." Kramer's eyes flicked to the glowing phones around them, then back to Marcus. His expression hardened, but his voice stayed calm. You realize the longer you resist, the worse this looks. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm not resisting. I'm protecting. There's a difference. The crowd leaned in closer. A mother near the swings muttered, "He's right." A man in a ball cap nodded, folding his arms. But Denton, still stung from his earlier stumble, seized the moment. "Lieutenant, subject refused lawful commands. We can take him in now." Kramer lifted a hand, silencing him, but the suggestion lingered like smoke. The people around them shifted uneasily. Everyone knew what that next step would look like. Hands forced behind the back, children pulled away. A man marched off, not as a father, but as a suspect. And then Alyssa's small voice cut through. "Why won't you believe us?" she asked, her words breaking but steady. "He's our dad. He's a hero. Why do you think we're lying?" The hush that followed her words was heavier than anything Kramer could have ordered. Even Mills blinked, his jaw slackening. For a flicker of a second, Marcus thought he saw doubt touch the lieutenant's eyes. But then it vanished, replaced by the professional mask again. "We're not calling you liars," Kramer said smoothly, but his words were aimed outward toward the cameras in the crowd. "We're ensuring everyone's safety. That's our duty." Marcus saw it clearly then. The playbook, the script. They were never going to admit fault. They were building a record, a narrative, piece by piece, one that would outlast this afternoon and follow him long after the crowd went home. He felt the dread settle into his bones, but he also felt something else rise against it. A refusal to let them write that record unchecked. He lifted his chin, looked Kramer straight in the eye, and said, "Your duty is to protect, not to invent danger. My children are not evidence for your report." The words drew another murmur from the crowd, louder this time, angrier. Phones tilted forward, catching every angle. Someone shouted, "Leave him alone." Another added, "We see what's happening here." Kramer's jaw set, but he didn't move forward. He stood in the deepening twilight, authority clashing with exposure, the system's weight pressing against the truth that refused to bow. The children clung tighter to their father. The crowd leaned further into witness, and the night air hummed with a question that no badge could silence. Whose story would survive when the sun finally set? The first ping on Alyssa's screen came like a pebble in still water. Grandma Linda had joined the stream. Then another name slid across, a teammate from school. Then 3 more, then 10, then a sudden spill of hearts and question marks as the numbers climbed. Alyssa didn't understand algorithms or reach. She only knew that the tiny red live box at the top of her phone seemed to glow hotter with every passing second. Her breath feathered the microphone. "Please," she whispered to the world that had suddenly arrived. "This is my dad. They won't believe us." Kramer's gaze ticked to the phone like a man noting a second clock in the room. Denton scowled. Mills looked as if he wanted to fold himself thinner. The couple who had started it all stood awkwardly at the edge now, their righteous certainty softening into something like embarrassment as strangers on the live stream typed, "Let the father be. We see you. Don't touch him." A man in a park polo read comments over his wife's shoulder and blinked hard, as if the text might be a trick of the light. From behind the ring of onlookers came a voice with gravel in it, shaped by cigarettes and early mornings. "Coach Reed?" The speaker shouldered through the bodies gently and then firmly, apologizing with nods and little touches. He was in his 50s, barrel-chested, with a limp you only noticed on his third step. The name tag on his union jacket said Walker. He stopped a few feet from Marcus and raised a hand like he was asking to speak in church. "Sergeant Joseph Walker," he said to the officers first, out of old habit. He turned to Marcus then, his eyes crinkling. "We ran hot on Rot Bear. You pulled Martinez out of that truck when it lit up. I still got the scars from the shrapnel. You saved more than one man that day." Marcus blinked, recognition rising through the fog of the moment like a lighthouse light. "Walker," he said softly, and in the single word there was a rifle volley's worth of memory. They clasped forearms like men who had stood on a different edge together. Alyssa's camera caught the gesture. Comments exploded with a strange mix of crying face emojis and flag icons and the plainest words, "He's not a threat. He saved lives." Kramer's expression flickered. Annoyance, calculation, something colder, and then smoothed back into the official blank. "Sir," he said to Walker, patient as a brochure, "we appreciate the sentiment. We still need to ensure you don't railroad a good father in front of his children," Walker cut in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at Denton, then at Mills, then at Kramer, his gaze steady the way a level is steady. "You got a dozen witnesses, a kid live streaming, a PE teacher vouching, a veteran ID in his wallet, and a face I'd trust to get me home in the dark. What else do you need? A notarized letter from God." A few in the crowd laughed, the kind of sudden laughter that comes when tension needs a crack to escape through. Even Alyssa found a tiny, shaking smile. Malik pressed closer to Marcus's side and peeked out at Walker like a boy watching a magician pull a coin from behind his ear. Denton rapped his knuckles on his vest twice, a little drumbeat for his temper. "Sir, step back." "You first," Walker replied. "You've been crowding this man since you got here." He took off his cap, revealing hair clipped close and a crescent scar that hugged his temple. "You see this?" he asked the nearest camera, not waiting for an answer. "I didn't get it at a picnic. I got it standing between a bad thing and a worse thing. That's what he's doing now." He jerked his chin toward Marcus, whose shoulders had loosened a fraction just at the presence of someone who remembered him at his best. "He's shielding his kids from a story y'all are trying to write without facts." Kramer adjusted his posture, squaring himself against the invisible wind. "We're writing an incident report, not a story." "Every report is a story," Walker said, and now he did raise his voice, just enough to carry to the back row of faces. "Ask any mother who's read one with her son's name in it. Ask any dad who's had to explain to a judge why his presence in a neighborhood was suspicious at sunset. We've all lived the wrong version of a story somebody else told." A murmur answered him, the low, rolling kind that comes from bellies and lived lives. An elderly woman near the bench with the peeling paint lifted her chin and said, "Amen," almost under her breath and yet somehow loud enough to hear. The woman in the floral blouse blinked at her shoes. Her husband cleared his throat and tried to look like part of the hedge. On Alyssa's screen, the viewer count jumped again. A box popped up, "Request to join live at Sarah King News." Alyssa didn't know the name, but someone behind her did. "That's Channel 7, a teenager hissed, eyes wide. "Let her in." Alyssa's thumb trembled, but she tapped accept. In seconds, the screen split and a reporter's face appeared, framed by a van interior and the hum of scanner chatter. "This is Sarah King with City News," she said, tone crisp but threaded with something human. "We're headed to Riverside Park. We're live with, what's your name, sweetheart?" "Alyssa," she whispered, and her voice went small only for the single syllable. "My dad is Marcus Reed. They think he's not our dad." Sarah King's eyes flicked aside, reading whatever producers were shouting in her ear, then came back full steady. "We're on our way. Keep your camera up if you can. You're doing exactly the right thing." Kramer's jaw tightened. Denton swore softly, like a man finding the door he'd been trying to hold closed already had a foot in it. Mills looked a little green. Walker threw a glance at Marcus and said, "You got the whole city watching now." The chant didn't start all at once. It came in pieces, like a song people half remembered. A woman by the swings began it, her voice thin at first. "Let him go." A man by the drinking fountain picked it up, stronger. The teenagers found the beat with their boards like drums. "Let him go. Let him go." The words thickened, deepened, filled the air the way fog fills a low field. Even those who didn't chant hummed, or nodded, or set their feet in rhythm. Marcus felt the sound rise under his shoes, a drum he hadn't asked for, but which matched the slow thud in his chest. "Crowd is becoming agitated," Denton said pointedly to Kramer, as if agitation were a weather system the lieutenant could cite to clear the sky. "Recommend we detain before this turns." "You lay hands on him in front of those kids, in front of these cameras," Walker said, gentler than the words deserved, "and you'll be writing one hell of a story tonight." Kramer took a long look at Marcus then, really looked. not just at the height and the set of his shoulders, but at the way his hands stayed open, at the tremor in the boy plastered to his leg, at the small girl holding the world together with two thumbs and a thin Wi-Fi signal. For a moment the mask slipped and a tired man appeared, someone who had seen too many Friday nights end badly. Then the mask was back. "We're going to verify identities and de-escalate," he announced, aiming it at the phones more than at the people. Everyone remained calm. "We've been calm," Alyssa said, surprising herself again. "You're the ones who turned a game into this." It wasn't defiance, it was testimony. The chant dimmed for 3 beats, as if to let the sentence float on its own. Sarah King's square on the screen darted as her van took a corner. 2 minutes out, she said, voice clipped. "Don't stop rolling." Lopez stepped forward to stand with Walker, shoulder to shoulder, an accidental phalanx. "Lieutenant," he said, "if you want school records, I'll unlock the office and pull them. Call the principal, call the rec center director, call half this park. The answer will be the same." He lifted his hands, palms up, the universal sign of nothing to hide. Or maybe the answer you need is already in front of you. A boy in a varsity jacket cleared his throat. "He taught me to box out," he said, red-faced but determined. He taught me to say sir and ma'am. He gives kids rides home when it's dark." "Me too," a girl added, braid swinging. "He bought my brother cleats when he couldn't afford them." The stories landed one after another, small and ordinary, the way raindrops land on parched ground until it's too wet to burn. Phones recorded, comment bubbles stacked into columns. Somewhere, a producer told a control room to bump the mayor interview. Somewhere, a grandmother in a neat kitchen whispered a prayer to the television. Kramer lifted his radio and spoke into it low. Marcus couldn't catch the words, only the cadence. He looked down at Alyssa and Malik, their faces upturned, their eyes shining with fear and something more stubborn than fear, and felt a strange heat behind his eyes he hadn't felt since the day he folded a flag for a mother who hadn't wanted it. He swallowed it down and nodded once, to them, to Walker, to Lopez, to the old man in the tiger's cap, and the woman who had said amen. "Sir," Mills said to Kramer, "what's the call?" "The call," Walker answered for him, a smile tucked deep in his voice, "is to do the right thing, son." For the first time all afternoon, Kramer didn't swat the words away. He let them hang there, measuring them against the weight in his own chest, the glow of 100 cameras, the chant that wouldn't quite die. He rubbed his jaw with 2 fingers, looked at Denton, then at Marcus, then at the children who had not left his side. The decision wasn't written on his face, but the crowd felt it coming the way birds feel the change in air before rain. Alyssa's phone buzzed with a new comment that she read without meaning to. "We're with you. Don't stop." She raised her chin a fraction and steadied the frame. Malik, braver now because his sister was brave, slid his hand into Marcus's and squeezed, a signal between soldiers that needed no words. The chant swelled again, softer but fuller, like a lullaby sung by 1,000 throats. "Let him go, let him go." Kramer exhaled, long and quiet. "Mr. Reed," he said, and this time the name sounded less like a case file and more like a person. "We're going to review everything on scene." He paused, glanced once at Denton, whose mouth had collapsed into a thin, white line. "Nobody's leaving in cuffs today." The relief was not a cheer, it was a release, a soft collapsing of shoulders, a handful of tears, a shaky laugh from somewhere near the fountain. The chant faltered, then changed shape into clapping that had more gratitude than victory in it. Walker let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and clapped Marcus once on the shoulder, a heavy, careful pat. "You held," he said, almost to himself. "You held." Marcus nodded, the weight in his knees suddenly enormous. "I had to," he murmured, and he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Walker or to his daughter's little red live box or to the boy who would remember the rhythm of this day as long as he lived. He bent down to Alyssa and Malik, pressing his forehead to theirs, the 3 of them a small, unbreakable unit in the middle of a city park that had finally decided, for one breath, to believe them. Sirens were no longer a threat so much as a metronome, ticking from the streets to the park's edge and back again. What really drove the heartbeat now was the glow of a dozen little screens and the sudden rush of a news van shouldering past the curb like a ship nosing into a crowded dock. The side door slid open before the tires had fully settled, and Sarah King stepped out with a cameraman at her shoulder, the red tally light already blinking. She moved with the quick calm of someone who learned that voice and pace can quiet a stampede. Sarah King, City News, she said to no one and everyone, eyes taking in the children, the officers, the old veterans, the nerved-up couple, the field of neighbors turned witnesses. We're live. Alyssa's split screen collapsed as Sarah's feed took the air. For a second, the girl looked bereft. Then the cameraman's lens found her face, and she straightened, chin up, hands steady even as they trembled. Sarah crouched just enough to be level with Alyssa. "Sweetheart, tell me your name again." "Alyssa Reed," she said into the glass, her voice clear now, no longer a whisper into a void. "That's my dad, Marcus. We were just playing. They wouldn't believe us." Sarah nodded once, no theatrics. "Thank you," she said and turned to Marcus, then to Kramer. "Lieutenant, can you give us a statement?" Kramer's eyes flicked to the camera, to the crowd, to Denton's jaw set hard enough to crack a tooth. "We're verifying identities and ensuring the safety of minors," he said in that practiced timbre, each word buffed to a bureaucratic shine. "No arrests are being made at this time." "Were there allegations of abduction?" Sarah asked, not aggressive but surgical. "And if so, have they been substantiated?" Denton opened his mouth as if to seize the moment back, but Kramer's look, a quick flash of command, shut it. "We are investigating a report," Kramer said. "We will review on-scene video and witness statements." "On-scene video," Sarah echoed, turning to the circle of phones. "If you recorded what happened, hold your devices where we can see. We'll collect copies." The request turned the park into a quiet constellation. Screens rose, small suns in the deepening light. Even the woman in the floral blouse, cheeks pale now, held hers up halfway and then, with a jerk of conscience, raised it the rest of the way. Denton took a step, closing distance as if the only way to control the narrative was to compress the air around it. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "you're interfering with the police." "I'm documenting a public interaction," she replied, steady as a plumb line. "And so are they." For a sliver of a second, something like panic flared in Denton's eyes, less about danger than about losing the advantage of shadows. He pivoted back to Marcus as if drawn by a magnet, anger looking for a purchase. "You," he said, pointing, "put your hands." "My hands are right here," Marcus answered, palms open, empty, patient. "They've been here the whole time." The cameraman eased sideways, framing a shot that held Marcus and his children and the officers in a single, damning geometry. The lens drank in detail. The damp edge of Alyssa's braid, Malik's small fist bunched in his father's shirt, the scuffed toes of Marcus's sneakers, the way Denton's hand hovered near his belt like a moth near a porch light. Somewhere behind the camera, Henry Carlisle whispered, "Hold your ground," as if the lens were a living thing that could be steadied by faith. Lopez stepped into frame without quite meaning to, a witness who had decided that standing off to the side was a kind of lie. "He's Coach Reed," he said, addressing the lens. "He volunteers at the school. Those are his kids. We've all seen them together 100 times. "Sir, please step back," Mills said, but it came out automatic, a barely breathed line from a play he no longer believed in. Sarah kept moving, not rushing, her microphone catching small statements that would matter later in editing. A mother's, "I was here the whole time." A teen's, "He taught me how to shoot." Walker's low, "We bled the same dirt." The park's sound became a tapestry, shoes on grit, leaves that finally remembered how to move, the rhythmic thud of a basketball nudged by a stranger's foot as if the game might resume when decency did. Then the moment narrowed to a wire. Denton leaned in and reached, not for his weapon, not yet, but for Marcus's forearm, a grab meant to drag the scene back into his grip. Marcus drew a breath that steadied the world. He shifted just enough that Denton's fingers slid off skin and caught air. There was no strike, no flourish, only a calm refusal to be handled. The crowd exhaled like a wave pulling back from rock. Sarah's cameraman didn't flinch. He stayed on the hands, on the inches, on the quiet violence of a nearly made mistake. "We have that," Sarah murmured, mostly to the man behind the lens, partly to the city on the other side of the microwave signal. "Keep rolling." "Lieutenant," she said then, voice bright with urgency that older viewers would recognize from long nights of breaking news. "Given what you've seen here, multiple witnesses, on-scene footage, and no active threat, What does de-escalation look like right now? Kramer rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man with a headache that had a badge. He knew, and the cameras knew he knew, that this was the fork. We separate parties, confirm identities, and clear the scene, he said. The words were textbook, but when he turned to Denton, there was something human under them. No cuffs. Denton's mouth worked, forming an argument that had nowhere left to land. He settled for a glare at Marcus. "Don't test me," he muttered, too low for the microphone, but not low enough for the nearest phones. "I haven't tested you," Marcus said, meeting him without heat. "I've held my children." A shift moved through the crowd. Not triumph exactly, but the easing you feel when a fever breaks. People lowered shoulders, not phones. A few of them began to call out their names and numbers, offering them up like ballast for the truth. "Tina Salazar, I saw the whole thing." "Eric Huang, I was on the bench." "Mrs. Walton, choir director, I know this family." Sarah's producer would later curse the audio splice, too many good quotes at once. But in the moment it felt right that testimony overlapped. Even justice, when it finally speaks, trips over its own relief. The woman in the floral blouse took a small step forward, stopping within the frame's edge. I'm the one who called," she said, and a hush folded tight around her. She swallowed, the sound tiny and enormous in the microphone. "I thought it looked." Her husband touched her elbow, a cue to retreat, but she shook him off, cheeks burning. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't see what was actually happening." Her eyes flicked to Alyssa, then to Malik, and shame shivered her voice. "I'm sorry." No one applauded. The crowd seemed to understand that apologies are not performances. But the sound that followed, an older man's sigh, a grandmother's soft thank you, a child's whispered "it's okay" that might have been meant for himself, stitched something torn, if only at the edges. Sarah gave the woman a small nod and didn't press. She knew better than to wring drama from a lesson paid for by a child's tears. Instead, she turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Reed," she said, her tone lighter for the first time, "what do you want people to understand seeing this at home?" Marcus looked into the camera, and 1,000 living rooms leaned forward without meaning to. For a second, he saw his mother's old television, the rabbit ears wrapped in foil, the way she would stand too close when the news was bad, as if proximity could help. He saw the solemn faces of friends' parents folded by grief. He saw his children's reflections in the lens. He spoke not like a man on TV, but like a father at a kitchen table. "I want them to see that dignity isn't a weapon," he said. "That a raised voice isn't the same as truth, and a badge isn't a license to stop seeing what's in front of you. I want them to know my kids were just playing ball. And I want every father who looks like me to get home with his children having learned a lesson about layups, not about fear." The cameraman's viewfinder flashed a tiny warning. Battery low, but the moment had already fixed itself in silicon and memory. Kramer cleared his throat. "We're concluding on scene," he announced, and it sounded less like a closing door than a weary agreement. "Officers will take statements. No further action at this time." "Then we're leaving," Walker said, not to the police but to the crowd, as if shepherding them out of a storm. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder again. "I'll stick around till you get to your car." "Me too," Lopez said, and then 3 teenagers chimed in, and the old man in the tiger's cap, until it was clear that Marcus would not cross the lot alone. Denton stepped back at last, the fight going out of his posture but not his eyes. Mills exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the academy. The woman in the floral blouse turned to go, then turned back and, without stepping nearer, lifted a hand in a fluttering, uncertain wave toward Alyssa. The girl considered it, nodded once, and lowered her phone. It had done its work. As the crowd began to uncoil, Sarah touched Marcus's elbow, a courtesy, and held the microphone low. "We'll need copies of the video," she said quietly. "All of it, if you're willing." "We're willing," he said. He looked down at Alyssa. "You hear that, baby? You did good." Alyssa's mouth trembled, the brave lines she'd drawn all afternoon wobbling now that the worst had passed. "I was so scared," she admitted, the confession tiny and clean. "I know," Marcus said, pulling both children into him, cheek to their hair, the 3 of them making that small shelter only families know how to build. "Me too." He kissed the crown of Malik's head, then Alyssa's. "But we told the truth, and we told it where everybody could see. Across the park, the basketball rolled until it tapped a curb and stopped, waiting the way a dog waits by a door. The sun slid lower, staining the sky the color of peaches and brick. People drifted, slower now, talking in low voices, exchanging numbers, offering rides, promising to send files. The news van's dish angled up, a metal flower opening to the evening. In living rooms and diner booths and hospital lounges, the live feed cut to commercial and then back again. But the shape of the story had already set. Kramer watched them go with a look Marcus couldn't quite read. Maybe it was relief, maybe calculation, maybe the first hairline crack of understanding that this had been less about control than about sight. He gave a short nod, at Marcus, at the kids, at the facts, and turned away to the business of forms and calls that would be written in a language gentler than the one the afternoon had spoken. Marcus gathered the ball and tucked it under his arm. He took his children by the hands. They walked together toward the lot, Walker on one side, Lopez on the other, neighbors trailing like a quiet guard. Not a parade, not a victory march, just a family going home under a sky that had decided for once to bless their backs with light instead of suspicion. And if the cameras followed, well, let them. Tonight, the picture told the truth. The house was dark when Marcus finally pulled the car into the driveway. The porch light, usually a welcome beacon, seemed harsher now, as if even it were questioning him. The children were slumped in the back seat, worn out not from basketball, but from hours of fear, adrenaline, and the long ride home that had stretched in silence. Alyssa's phone had gone dark after the battery died. Malik had curled against his sister's side, too tired to ask more questions. Marcus shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles were white, not from anger, but from the effort it took to hold everything inside. He could feel the faint tremor running through his fingers, the aftershock of a day that had demanded every ounce of control he possessed. He stared at the porch, at the familiar chipped paint, and the weeds pushing up through the cracks in the walk, and wondered if home could still mean safe. "Dad," Alyssa mumbled, half awake, "are we okay?" He turned to look at her weary eyes and the faint smear of tears on her cheek. He nodded. "Yeah, baby girl, we're home now. You're safe." He wanted to believe the words. He wanted them to be ironclad. But even as he said them, he felt the lie pressing against the edges. Safe for now. Safe tonight. Tomorrow was another story. He helped Malik out of the car first, the boy clinging to his neck, whispering, "Don't let go, Dad." Marcus kissed the top of his head. "Never." Alyssa followed, holding her dead phone like a relic of battle. Together they walked up the porch steps and into the quiet of the house. Inside, Marcus guided them through the motions of normalcy. He reheated leftovers, though no one had much appetite. Malik pushed food around his plate until his eyelids drooped. Alyssa nibbled mechanically, her eyes far away, as if she were still standing in that park with strangers watching. Marcus forced himself to eat a few bites, though every swallow tasted of metal. When the dishes were cleared, he ushered them upstairs. Malik wanted the hall light on, the door open, his father close. Marcus obliged, sitting on the edge of the bed while Malik's breathing slowed into sleep. Alyssa lingered in her doorway, arms crossed. "What if they come back?" she asked. Her voice was low, steady, too old for 11. Marcus met her eyes. "If they do, we'll handle it. And we've got proof now. People saw." But what if there wasn't a crowd? What if nobody had their phones out? The question split him open. He wanted to say something soothing, something that would erase the image of her father nearly dragged away. But he couldn't. He saw her waiting, saw the way she needed honesty more than comfort. "Then it would have been harder," he admitted softly. "But I'd still fight to come home to you. That'll never change." She nodded, her jaw tight, tears brimming but unshed. She whispered, "You shouldn't have to fight just to be our dad." Then she turned into her room, leaving Marcus standing in the hall with her words hanging like a sentence he couldn't appeal. Hours passed. The house settled into the creaks and sighs of night, but Marcus lay awake on the couch, unwilling to close his eyes. He kept the TV on mute, the images flickering across his face without sound. Every shadow outside the window felt like a watcher. Once the beam of headlights swept across the curtains and his body tensed, ready for the knock that never came. At midnight, he went to the kitchen for water. As he stood at the sink, he noticed a car idling across the street, lights off, a silhouette barely visible behind the wheel. His heart kicked hard. He turned off the faucet and moved to the front door, careful not to wake the kids. He cracked the curtain. The car remained unmoving for another minute before slowly pulling away. No lights, no plates he could catch, just a shadow driving into darker shadows. He stayed at the window long after it was gone. His mind ran through possibilities, a neighbor, a stranger, or a quiet reminder that today wasn't over. Not really. When he finally sat back down, he rubbed his hands over his face and whispered into the empty room, "Lord, give me strength." It wasn't the first time he'd said it. He thought of his comrades, of men he'd prayed with in desert tents before missions. He thought of the weight of the silver star in his wallet, how it had mattered and not mattered all at once. He thought of his children's eyes, wide with fear and trust, and how those eyes were his true medal, the only honor he cared to defend. Sleep didn't come, not really. He drifted in and out, every sound jolting him back to alertness. In one of those moments between waking and dreaming, he imagined standing again in the park, the chant rising, the phones raised, Walker's hand heavy on his shoulder. He remembered Alyssa's whisper, "You shouldn't have to fight just to be our dad." The words sank deep, heavier than any metal, heavier than any accusation. As dawn began to gray the sky outside, Marcus rose from the couch, his back stiff, his eyes burning. He walked quietly upstairs to check on the kids. Mullick was curled in a tangle of blankets, thumb in his mouth, breathing soft. Alyssa had left her lamp on, her phone charging by the bed, the screen lighting up with new notifications she hadn't yet seen. Marcus watched them both for a long time, standing in the doorway with his arms folded, the soldier and the father fused into one weary figure. He whispered again, though softer this time, like a vow carried only to the walls of his home. "You'll be safe. I don't care what it takes." And in that fragile hour between night and morning, Marcus knew the battle wasn't over. The park had been just one front. The real war would be in the days ahead, in the shadows parked on his street, in the questions his daughter would keep asking, in the looks his son would carry long after the bruises of fear faded. He closed their doors gently, one by one, and returned to the living room, where the first light of day pressed against the curtains. There would be no sleep tonight, only vigilance, only resolve. By mid-morning, the neighborhood felt like it was breathing again. The sun came up as if it hadn't witnessed anything, but everybody else had. The live clips were everywhere, on phones at bus stops, on televisions in barbershops, on the muted screen above the coffee pots at the church basement where the rec center had borrowed space for a community meeting. Folding chairs scraped concrete. The smell of old hymnals and fresh donuts mixed in the air. People filed in quietly, some still in work uniforms, some with children tugging at their sleeves. They didn't come for spectacle. They came the way folks show up for a friend after a house fire, carrying casserole dishes of attention and whatever solace a body can hold. Marcus stood near the back door, hands in his pockets, watching the room fill like a man who wasn't sure he belonged in the front. Walker arrived first, limping less this morning, hat tucked under his arm. Lopez brought a plastic tub of paper cups and a face that couldn't hide its worry if it tried. Alyssa kept checking her phone, reading messages, and then locking the screen against her chest as if to keep the kindness from spilling out. Malik had his basketball under his arm like a shield. He bounced it once and looked up at his father. "Are we telling people?" he asked. "We're telling the truth," Marcus said. "Same as last night." When Sarah King slipped in with a small crew, people made space without being asked. She gave Marcus a quick nod, not the glossy kind from television, but the human one that says, "I came because it mattered to me too." On a folding table, someone had set up a projector aimed at a sagging sheet pinned to the wall. The room went dim when they cut the lights. The first image that filled the cloth wasn't of flashing patrol cars or raised voices. It was Alyssa's shaky view of the court as sunlight flickered through the oaks. Her voice came small and brave. "This is my dad." There were parts that made the room flinch. The shove, the reach for a wrist, the instant when the air turned to glass. There was the stillness that followed, and then the photo of a medal held to the light. Each time the crowd watched Denton's hand hover near his belt, you could feel the collective breath hitch. Each time Marcus's open palms filled the frame, you could feel shoulders lower by a degree. The chant bled through laptop speakers thin as a hymn sung by ghosts. Let him go. When the clip ended, the room was quiet, not stunned, decided. A city representative cleared his throat near the front. A careful man in a careful suit. He offered the language of processes and timelines, said there would be a review, said the department welcomed footage. Someone asked about Denton. Someone asked about training. Someone asked what a child was supposed to do when the adults forgot how to see. The man in the suit kept his voice even, but he looked like a person trying to mop a floor while the ceiling still leaked. Every answer landed like a folded piece of paper, documented, polite, insufficient. Kramer came in halfway through, without cameras, hat in his hand. Murmurs ran like minnows. He stood against the wall almost as far back as Marcus, eyes on the screen as if he hadn't been there when it was shot. When people turned to look at him, he didn't raise both palms in the universal sign for not now. He just nodded once, a small admission that he knew which way the river had started to run. Later, he'd talk about policy and restraint and the bruise drawn by pride, but in that moment he watched a simple record and let it ask him questions he couldn't dodge. When they asked Marcus to speak, he felt the old surge of stage fright he hadn't known since high school, the way words lodge in a throat unused to microphones. He looked at his children first. Alyssa had squared her shoulders the way he had taught her to do before a free throw. Malik's small hand rested on the ball like a promise he wasn't ready to make, but wanted to believe. Marcus stepped forward because they were watching and because he was tired of letting other people narrate his life. "I don't have a speech," he said, his voice rough but sure, the way gravel roads hold you better than ice. "I've got 2 kids who play ball and a job that doesn't pay enough, and a medal I keep in my wallet because some days I need reminding we're more than the worst thing that's happened to us." A ripple of laughter folded into a sigh. "Yesterday, I was asked to prove I belonged to my own children. That's a sentence I never wanted them to learn." He let the anger pass through him without catching fire, the way a good soldier lets wind move through his uniform instead of fighting it. "A lot of you have lived it too. Some of you called it in last night and said, 'We see you. Thank you.' That's all a man wants sometimes, to be seen as what he says he is." He glanced at Kramer without making it a challenge. "I don't want anybody shamed on a loop forever," he said. "I want better training and better eyes. I want kids whose dads don't carry medals or whose daughters don't carry phones to get home because someone chose wisdom over pride." He rested his palm on the top of Malik's head, and the boy leaned instinctively into the touch. "I want to coach and pay my bills and go to church and teach my son how to box out and my daughter how to drive and get old in a city that doesn't make me prove every other Saturday that I'm allowed to love my children out loud." Applause rose, not the sharp kind that breaks a moment, but the warm kind that holds it. Walker shouted, "That'll preach," and someone in the back answered, "Amen." The man in the careful suit looked at his shoes and then back up, something new loosening in his jaw. Kramer shifted his weight and gave one more short nod. It wasn't absolution. It was a beginning. After the city people spoke their last circuits of policy, after Sarah's crew packed cables and promised to keep the story honest, after the donuts were down to 2 glazed and a crumbling maple, the room thinned. Folks came to clap Marcus on the shoulder, to tell him small stories that sounded like his own, told in different houses. A grandmother pressed a foil-wrapped loaf into his arms and said, "For the babies," as if bread could be armor. Maybe it could. In the parking lot afterward, the air felt washed. Clouds moved fast above the church steeple, opening windows of blue. Alyssa walked a few paces ahead with Sarah, talking about how to save the files and where to send them. Malik dribbled and missed and dribbled again. Kramer stopped on the steps and waited until the others had gone ahead. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly when they were alone, "I can't take yesterday back. I can make tomorrow look different." He looked like he was trying to say 3 things at once and had only the one mouth. "You have my number," he added, scribbling it on a torn corner of the agenda. If anybody from my side circles your block again, call me first. Marcus took the paper and folded it once, twice. I want change more than I want apologies, he said. And this time Kramer nodded like a man who'd been given work instead of absolution. They went back to the park that afternoon. It wasn't a demonstration or a dare. It was the stubborn faith that repetition heals. The court looked smaller in daylight, the paint more scuffed. A few neighbors waved from benches. Henry Carlisle sat where the sun warmed the boards, hat tilted, like a lighthouse keeper in a city of inland seas. Lopez jogged in late with a whistle and a bag of oranges. Rematch, he called, grinning. Same rules. Winner gets bragging rights till Tuesday. Marcus set the ball down at the top of the key. Alyssa took a breath, bounced twice, and sank a clean jumper that kissed the backboard and dropped through. Malik whooped so loud a couple sparrows fled the chain link. A mother pushing a stroller clapped as if she'd watched overtime at the Garden. It wasn't triumph. It was ordinary. Marcus felt the holiness of it hit him square in the chest. On the way out for ice cream, Sarah called to say the station had cut the evening package. No music under the shove, no lurid slow motion, just the drawl of truth playing at the speed of life. A state senator had retweeted the clip with words about policy that might one day turn into law. The department had announced an external review. People he didn't know had sent small donations to the rec program with notes that read for cleats, for lights, for kids who stay late. They sat in a booth by the window at the ice cream shop, the kind with the high stools that squeak. Malik ate his cone too fast and got a brain freeze that made his eyes cross, and Alyssa laughed the first pure laugh of the day, the kind that chases shadows back under the door. A little boy at the next table pointed and whispered, "That's the hero," and his mother shushed him quick, not out of scolding, but out of care. Let the man eat his ice cream in peace. Marcus pretended not to hear, not because it wasn't nice, but because the words sat uneasily on his tongue. "Dad?" Alyssa said between licks. "Are you going back? You know, to the army? People keep asking in the comments if you'll go help fix things from the inside." He looked out the window at the park across the street, at the hoop crooked by an inch, at the patch of grass where someone had lost a shoe and someone else had found it. He thought of hot tents and cold barracks, of the clean rules of deployments and the dirty rules that govern regular streets. He shook his head. "No," he said gently. "My post is here." He touched a hand to his daughter's shoulder, to his son's crown. "With you, with kids who need a ride and a stern word and a Saturday practice, with neighbors who are learning to see, with a city that might, if we keep at it, remember how to tell the right story first." When they left, the light had gone honey thick. Cars moved slow. Somewhere, a choir practiced off-key and earnest with a door propped open to let the music spill. Marcus carried the leftover cones to the trash and held the door for a woman pushing a walker. She thanked him like his name was on a plaque. He smiled and said it back the way a man says it when the day has taken things from him and returned something he didn't know how to ask for. On the sidewalk, Alyssa slid her hand into his without looking, and Malik bumped his hip against his father's leg as if to make sure the shape was still there. They crossed toward the park where the backboard waited. It would need paint soon. He'd bring a brush. He'd bring oranges. He'd bring himself. The world hadn't changed in one day, and it might not change in 10, but he had chosen his watch and he meant to keep it. As they reached the curb, he tightened his grip once, not out of fear this time, but out of habit and love, and the three of them stepped off together into the long amber of a city learning, slowly and out loud, to see.